If you're considering laying pavers, this is the only video you'll need. And by the end of this video, you'll know everything you need to know to install pavers better than a pro. Not only that, but you'll save a ton of money. I was quoted for this 50 square foot patio $1,500. On the other hand, my DIY installation with all costs and materials was only $460. In this video, we'll cover materials, proper installation, best practices, and much more. Let's quickly look at the basics of installing pavers. It may seem as simple as flattening a surface and placing your pavers nice and square. However, due to factors such as erosion, compaction, and other factors, an installation like this won't last very long, with deformation beginning in months and over the years heavily deforming. So in order to make a long-lasting base, we need to dig down to where the ground is harder and sturdier. We then have to build a surface back up with material that won't erode, shift, sink, or compact easily. Gravel is a common material used for this and has the required properties. With the gravel, we have a sturdy surface. However, we can't just place our pavers over the gravel. That's because the gravel is an uneven surface that will place varying pressure points on the pavers, potentially leading to cracks later on, and more commonly shifting as the stones don't provide a consistent, even surface. So our final layer before placing our pavers is river sand. This coarse sand easily fills the spaces in the stone and creates a perfectly level surface on top to lay the pavers. There are, of course, many more important details we'll cover as we go through the build. The tools you'll need for this build are a digging shovel, a pickaxe, a wheelbarrow, tape measure, a large level, a screed, chisel, hammer, metal rake, tamper, and a plate compactor that you could rent at your local rental place. For materials, you're going to need gravel, sand, pavers, polymeric sand, stakes, string line, paver edge, and 10-inch metal spikes. Many of these materials can be found cheaper on Amazon and are linked below. So the first step is to select pavers, and this is a matter of preference. Some things to consider, however, is that the taller the paver, the deeper you'll have to dig, and the more weight they can handle. This is usually marked on the label at the store. Another thing to consider is that if you're mixing different styles for edges and so on, you'll want to buy pavers that are the same thickness to simplify installation. Though different height pavers can be combined, and I'll show you later in the video how it can be done. Once you've selected your pavers, you need to know how many you need to purchase. Doing this is usually simple. You'll want to measure your space you want to pave and calculate the square footage. If it's a square or rectangular space, it's easy. Simply multiply the two sides and you'll get your square footage. Now that you know your square footage, you could head to your store and buy the pavers you need. The paver labels will have a paver coverage rate, usually marked at the store, and this makes it easy. All you have to do is take your square footage and multiply it by this coverage rate, and that is how many pavers you need. Typically, you'll also want to add 5 to 10% to account for broken pavers or pavers you may need to cut. And now that we're back from the store, we're ready to get to work. Now, we'll have to decide where we roughly want our pavers to go and how thick we want our base. The thicker the base, the more weight the pavers will be able to handle without deforming. If your pavers will only see light foot traffic, maybe have a table and a barbecue grill on it, then 4 to 6 inches of gravel base should be enough. However, if it's for a driveway, large trucks, heavy traffic, you'll want somewhere between 8 to 12 inches of gravel. Now, on top of this gravel base, you'll want 1 inch of leveling sand and also the thickness of your pavers. Adding all this up gives you how deep you have to dig below your paver height. In my case, my pavers are 1.6 inches, my sand 1 inch, and a 4-inch gravel base, so our depth to dig is 6.6 inches. With this in mind, you can roughly mark out your space you need to dig. However, you need to measure out an additional 4 to 10 inches depending on the weight your pavers will be supporting. This is because your gravel base needs to extend beyond your pavers for proper support, usually the same amount as the thickness of your base. So once you've decided where to dig, use stakes or spray paint to mark out the rough area you want to dig out. Another thing to keep in mind is how much work this will be. If you're working alone, depending on your soil hardness, your personal strength and skill, and obstructions like roots, stones, and other structures, it's going to take about 1 day of digging for every 50 square feet, 6 inches deep. So you should also consider renting could steer for a day if it's a very large area. Renting some equipment can save you weeks of work if you're doing 200 to 400 square feet or more. It's also important to keep in mind that the base should always slope away from any structure 1 inch per 4 foot. So make sure to take this into account when digging. And also keep in mind that this excavation doesn't have to be perfect. Later, the level will be precisely set with the gravel and sand. So we've covered quite a bit of detail, but don't be deterred. It's just a matter of following a couple of proper steps. So when it comes to digging, in summary, you just need to determine your area to pave. Measure out an additional 4 to 10 inches on each side depending on your base thickness. Mark your area to dig with stakes, line, or spray paint. Plan your digging work time considering 1 day of work for every 50 square feet, 6 inches deep by hand. And also keep in mind that when digging, you'll need to slope your pavers away from any structure 1 inch per 4 foot. Now we're ready to start digging. Just use a shovel if the land is soft. However, you'll often need a pickaxe to loosen up that dirt. Especially if there's a lot of roots and stone, you're definitely going to need that pickaxe. Use a wheelbarrow to carry your dirt either to get rid of it or use it on another area of your home, preferably. Remember to save your back and train those legs. Lift with your legs and hold the shovel close to the head to reduce strain and leverage working against you. Now in my case, I have a concrete edge where I'm digging, so I'll use a sledgehammer to break it up and move it out of the way. As you're digging and you reach your depth, use a relatively straight 2x4 and lay it on the ground to find high spots that still need to be dug down deeper. As you're finishing up your depth, you can use this 2x4 to somewhat screed the ground and somewhat level it, though remember, it doesn't have to be perfect. Just make sure you've dug deep enough and dug a slope away from any structure. Now that we've dug our proper depth, we need to prepare to lay our base. And for this, we have to consider two things. One is our base material, and the second, our plate compactor rental. We have to coordinate our times to either pick up the base material if you have a way to get it, or get the material delivered the same day we rent our plate compactor. In my case, it's a small area and I could get my material very close by in my own truck. And the plate compactor is from my local Home Depot, which I rented for $87 for 24 hours. Now for our material, we're gonna have to do a little bit of math, but it's not too complicated. There are many ways to calculate your material. The easiest way, however, is just to take the depth of your gravel in inches, let's say 4 inches in my case, divide that by 12, and this is your multiplier. All this means is that you're gonna multiply this number by your square footage. Now remember to take into account your access beyond your pavers mentioned before. In my case, I have 50 square feet plus 4 inches on each side. This gives me 59 square feet total. So simply multiply the number by 59 and you get the total required cubic feet of gravel. Now on top of this, we want to add an extra 5 to 10% for filling low spots, lost material, and so on. Now when we go to buy our material, it's going to be typically sold in half-yard increments, half a yard being 13.5 cubic feet. In my case, I need 21 cubic feet, so I'll go ahead and get 1 yard of material being 27 cubic feet. Alright, we're back with our material and compactor ready, and our first step is to compact the ground. We're going to compact the ground with no material, and this is especially important if we were digging by hand using a pickaxe. We've likely loosened up more dirt than was necessary, and we've gone beyond the depth, and we need to compact that dirt back down to avoid it shifting later on. So get your compactor in there and give it at least 4 passes. And with that, we're ready to start adding our material. However, you can't just dump all of the material and try to compact that down. This will result in poor compaction at the bottom with optimal results only towards the surface of the base. So in order to achieve the best results, we're going to want to build up our base in 1 inch increments, compacting at each step. So what we do is add 1 inch of material, and we're going to go ahead and compact the material down. We're going to do 4 to 12 passes. Next, we add another 1 inch of material and repeat the step on compacting it down. Once we have 2 inches of gravel left, it's time to pull out your screed and start to level this gravel base. Doing so is simple. You just use your level to make sure that the gravel is level. Use the 2x4 to screed the gravel and make sure everything is level and you have a desired slope. Finally, add your last inch of material and again, screed, and level the gravel. Now we can compact our final layer of gravel. At this point, we should have a nicely compacted and level surface. An important detail is to use a hand tamper to get into the areas the plate compactor doesn't fit. So especially in those corners and edges, you're going to want to use that hand tamper. And at this point, we're done and we could return our compactor. Now, with our gravel base in place, we can now add our border or edge restraint. If edge restraints are not installed, your pavers will begin to separate and move. Especially with harsh weather, high traffic, and usage, your edge restraints are very important. Today, the most common and cheapest option are plastic. Now, edge restraints can be installed now or after your pavers are installed. Though if you do it afterwards, keep in mind that you'll have to pull away the sand to place the edge directly on the gravel. Personally, I prefer to install the edges after the pavers are installed, even though it's a little bit of extra work. I prefer to do it this way to make sure our edges are nice and tight against the pavers. So while you can do this now, I'm gonna go ahead and wait to do this afterwards. Next, we need that 1 inch of sand to level the surface and lock the pavers in place. The easiest way to do this is to use 2 3/4 inch tubes, which will have an outer diameter of 1 inch. With these 2 tubes, we can just lay them on the ground and screed sand right over them, resulting in a very level and nice 1 inch of sand. So we screed our sand over the gravel and we do it for the entire pad. Once all the sand is in place, we don't want to step on the sand or compact it too much. And with that, we could start placing our pavers. It's important to get a precise and square start to ensure the rest of your pavers go into place correctly. It's also important to get a bit of sand and fill the space where your tubes were laid to install the pavers. Now in my case, we want our pavers square to the sidewalk in front of it. And we're going to measure as we go to make sure our line is parallel to our sidewalk. And we'll use our large level to make sure the pavers are going in nice and square to each other. Some pavers will have spacers incorporated into the mold, which are nice, though in my case we do not have spacers incorporated and we do want our pavers spaced. So I purchased some of these plastic spacers and these are going to remain buried with the pavers. So as we lay our pavers, we're going to place spacers in between. A rubber mallet helps a lot to manipulate and place these pavers. Once all the center pavers are installed, we're ready to put our edge pavers. However, in our case, our edge pavers are taller than our center pavers. And while it's not recommended to mix sizes like this, it can be done. What we'll have to do is get a piece of wood and trace the brick on the wood. Then we're going to extend the top line to the end of the wood. With a jigsaw, we're going to cut out this excess, leaving you with something like this. We can now use this to screed over the pavers and drop that level down to where we need it. And this way we can mix different pavers of different thicknesses. At this point, we can now install our paver edge. To do so, we're going to have to pull away the sand to get to the gravel base. Keep in mind that this paver edge doesn't go to the top of the pavers. It only goes about 1 inch up the pavers. You'll also need some steel spikes, and it's important to note that these have to be uncoated spikes. These spikes will quickly rust, but this is an important part. The rust will lock the nails into the ground, making it tighter. When installing these, I like to start at an angle, then straighten the spike, which will tighten that plastic against the pavers. You'll want to install a spike every 1 to 1.5 foot. Another important thing to mention, once the spike reaches the plastic, if you continue to hammer it, that spike will be vibrating, causing the dirt to loosen and expanding that cavity. You'll usually always have to cut some pavers to get them to fit, and buying an expensive cutter for this isn't really an option if we're keeping this budget friendly. However, pavers can be easily cut with a mason chisel. The key here is patience. You'll want to measure the size you need, and then with your chisel, make score marks all the way around the paver. Then continue to hit on these score marks until the paver breaks in half. The key is to be patient and just go around and around until the paver breaks. And just like that, we could cut pavers with just a hammer and a chisel. Now all pavers are in place. We'll need to come back with a rubber mallet and tamp the pavers down a little bit to lock them in place and also to level the pavers. So with your large level, you can place them over the pavers, and this will make it easy to see which pavers are high and on what side. With your mallet, you're going to want to tap down these pavers to make them level with the rest. And we're going to continue to do this step all the way across the pavers. Then we're going to change direction and repeat this step. By the end of this, our pavers should be pretty level. After this step, avoid standing on the pavers and shifting the pavers any further. Alright, and with our base in place, our edging in place, all of our pavers nice and level, we're finally ready for our final steps, which is locking the pavers in with sand. Locking the pavers in involves filling every possible space with polymeric sand. This is essentially very fine sand that easily flows into the crevices. By filling every possible crevice and not allowing for any movement, we're essentially creating one solid big piece. Before you begin, make sure it's a dry day and your pavers are dry. It's important for the sand to be dry so it doesn't clump and it easily flows into the crevices dry. Now all you have to do is dump the sand over the pavers and sweep the sand around to fill all of the crevices. As the sand fills the spaces, you're going to feel the pavers become sturdier and sturdier. Once you've filled all the crevices, get your tamper and lightly tamp the entire space. You can use some foam if you're concerned with breaking your pavers. After this step, you may have sections and joints that will require more sand. So again, pour some sand on the ground and sweep it around to fill in all possible crevices. Finally, you're going to want to sweep all of the sand off of the surface. If you're using polymeric sand like this, it's going to harden after you wet it, so you want to make sure there's nothing on the surface. Using a blower helps a lot with getting all of that sand off the surface, but it's important not to point it directly into the joints. Use the blower only on the surface to get all of that sand off of the surface. Finally, take one last look and make sure there's no sand on your surface, and now you can soak your surface for 30 seconds. Do not point the water directly into the joints as it will pull out that sand. Now wait 10 to 15 minutes as it dries, and then soak again for another 30 seconds. And with that, we're nearing completion. Some final steps include filling the edges back in with dirt and tamping the dirt down. And that's it. Finally, we're done with our base and it's complete. Doing it this way, this base should last for decades if it has been done correctly for the correct weight.